Welcome to episode 4. I'm Roger Curlin. This is Miguel Miranda. We're going to be talking about safety and specifically the guidelines for reopening your hospitality locations. Some of the stuff we'll cover today we've mentioned tangentially in some of the earlier episodes, but we certainly feel like it's important enough that we want to have the full discussion during this episode. So as an overview, safety and health have always been a major focus and focal point for the regulation and public awareness when it comes to hospitality. I mean, obviously everyone's heard of dirty dining. There will be greater regulations and control put in place for the length of the crisis. We know there's going to be some additional requirements. And we've got to follow the local, the state, the federal guidelines, and obviously posting that for the entire team to be aware of. So what Miguel and I will be discussing for this episode is really some of the things you need to focus on and be aware of and make sure that you're doing those. There may be required training in the beginning to do for some of these things, Miguel. The key to meeting any new regulation, or maybe in a prior regulation that might not have been always followed, is training, and making those things become habit. So important in having leadership with the team so that people know what's expected of them. So really there's 4 key audiences, I feel, for safety procedures: customers, staff, vendors, and inspectors, right? So as you, the thing that you do covers all of them, but they're all looking at it a little bit different way. So Miguel, if you could begin for us talking about how are you keeping customers safe? Let's talk about the customer side for now.
So there's 2 things in respect to the customers. How do we keep them safe? In other words, what are the processes we have in place? And then how do they see us keeping them safe? And I think here's one of the situations where being overtly on some of the things is really key. And as we mentioned in prior episodes, talking about the limousine ride or kind of what does that guest experience look like, you need to take that lens into the situation. Because I think a lot of times we're going to do certain things thinking, okay, they're nice and clean, but they didn't see us do it. And so more so than ever, any of the key stakeholders, they need to see us actually doing some of these things. So for instance, a couple of examples. How do you process a credit card? Most often, in the past, we give the credit card and then we walk away and then we come back with it, which, by the way, we're the only industry that we actually would hand someone our credit card and they walk away with it and we don't think twice about it while we're taking some drinks. So what happens in Europe? They bring you the terminal to the table and you do it yourself. And so you may have to switch some of those things depending on your POS. I know some of the newer ones, especially the tablet-based, actually have the chip readers or the actual swipes already on there. So the customer themselves never actually are handing a credit card to someone else, and your employees aren't getting it back and forth. And so there's a safety from a financial side, making sure that's not happening, but also handing that piece off. What kind of menus do you have? What does that surface look like? Paper menus definitely cannot be used on a regular basis. What does the surface look like and feel like? So are they watching you clean the table, or are they doing a good wipe down? And by the way, when we say wipe down, it's not using the same rag over and over and over again. Actually, it's a brand new rag. And if you talk to your purveyors, you can get the sanitizer, pre-used bags, the disposable ones that you can grab, take out, and wipe down a table, and we know it's been sanitized. Something Roger said in prior episodes, we make sure you're mindful of this, is wiping it down and make sure it's clean is important. Does a place smell like bleach? Is not good. My wife actually, for instance, cannot stand the smell of bleach. She actually gets nauseous from the smell of it. So if she walked into a restaurant and it smelled like bleach, she'd ask me to leave. So she wants it to look clean and feel clean, but also make sure it doesn't smell like a hospital, which is going to detract from the experience. But they want to see you actually doing some of these things. And so what else could give you a nice smell of it being clean is actually using air fresheners. Mm-hmm. Does it actually clean it? No, but it does give the impression that you actually are cleaning it. So, by the way, I'm not saying have certain fresheners to make it seem clean, but not really clean yourself. It's more so add on to that idea of that this is actually a clean environment. Definitely, especially in bathrooms. Mm-hmm. A bathroom that smells clean, has that flowery smell, is going to be, a great place to be in. So, is it an extra cost? Of course it is, and we know there's services out there to do it. But you want to make sure you stay on top of it. And here's one thing I will say. In years past, I've talked to customers about maybe getting rid of some of these bathroom services because they're not cheap. this is not one that I will be skimping on at this point. This is not one you want to say, you know what, my team will take care of it. It's not something you're going to have the ability to keep up with on a regular basis, along with everything else you're being asked to do. So it's worth the expense having it with the automatic fresheners coming out, the automatic cleaners of the bowls and things like that. And then making sure in the bathrooms themselves, there's actually ways for people to maintain and cleanness on that.
And to your point also, Miguel, there's great room diffusers that use natural essential oils where you can put those maybe in entrance areas. So when people come in, it feels nice, it feels clean, it smells fresh, but not, as you say, bleachy and antiseptic, right? Because I've seen where sometimes a place will have that smell because they're covering up something else, right? So that's not always a great smell. One of the other things to do from the consumer standpoint is to do that really deep cleaning. And depending on the cycle of the restaurant, whether it's at opening or it's at closing, having that deep cleaning so that everything, as Miguel said in an earlier episode, having crumbs in the booth when you sit down is not a good thing, right? So just make sure the entire place is super clean. I think it's so important.
If I may interject on a deep clean. So hiring a company to do a deep clean who actually knows how to properly do a deep clean is really important. Why? Because you're paying to someone to do something they actually know how to do well. Right. So having your cook, your dishwasher, your servers do a deep clean may not always be the best thing. You may think it's cheaper for me, but it's not something they're used to doing. They don't do it well. They're not as efficient. They don't have the tricks of the trade of actually getting things done, and their wiping down of things is not done as well. That being said, do not let your night cleaning crew let your team off the hook. In other words, your cooks still need to sweep underneath the line. Your servers still need to check the crevices of the booths, because they recognize they're responsible for it on a regular basis. And deep clean resets you. Your staff that you have working for you maintains that cleanliness throughout the entire shift. Right. The first table being super clean is great, but what happens to that second wave that comes in? Do they have that really deep clean table? So one thing to look at is underneath the table, making sure you've got rid of all the gum or anything that might give the impression of being dirty. And then also for the restaurants that use tablecloths, I've seen places where they have a tablecloth and they put a second one on top, and then when someone leaves, they take the top one off, and then they put another one on there. That's a no-no. You got to get rid of both, because as you know, these materials, if you have the virus, it's going to go through the top tablecloth into the second one. So you got to make sure you're doing a proper clean across the board. Absolutely.
One of the things and we're not sure where this is going to land, is staff wearing masks. So I've seen in pictures of places that are doing reopening globally and in the United States with staff wearing masks. We don't know the regulation that's going to come down on that yet from either the local or the state or the federal. But I want you to start thinking about that, because if staff is required to wear masks, or you feel like it presents the best customer experience, think about what those masks look like, how they're clean, when they're clean. They've got mask making companies now that can put the logo of your business on there, or a positive stain or something of that sort. So you really want to make sure you've got enough masks, if you do have masks, for all the staff. Those are cleaned on a daily basis, much like you have a towel service, etc. But that's something you want to start thinking about now, because you can't just go to the store and grab masks right now. It's an ordering process for most.
Right. And so one thing I'm seeing a lot right now, my clients are doing, is they're actually using not just the face masks, the cloth ones, which is probably the only thing you get at this point, even when we put the filter inside. They're using a lot of that for the cashiers, or mainly the people actually bringing food to the curbside. But we're seeing a lot more of the plastic shields that are being built. They actually have a little pad that way is comfortable. You can still wear a cap. And what it does for you does a couple things. And again, I'm not sure regulation-wise how it's going to land, but it does allow for you to see full face, and it allows you to actually be able to breathe a little more, which is kind of tough. And then when you speak to someone, you can actually hear them a little better sometimes versus the overall face covering.
Right.
But these companies are using it for all employees. It means the cooks are also wearing them. And so why? Because if I'm a cook and I happen to be sick, and I'm cooking over the food, at least I have the mask in front of me. By the way, make sure you're getting masks that can be cleaned, unless you're going to go through the expense of having the disposables. But make sure you understand what it is you have. Don't get the disposable ones and try to use them nonstop. And then if you're a counter service, I would say for the time being, and probably the rest of the year at least, go ahead and make sure you have the PVC or the plexiglass partition, or the acrylic plastic partitions. You can pick something like that at Home Depot or Lowe's, and you can easily mount it, or there's companies already out there that are affix it to your registers. And that's a great way to keep, again, your employees and your guests safe from each other. And it doesn't seem too obtrusive where you have masks in place.
Right, so just start thinking about that now. We don't know the regulations on that, but be prepared. We also discussed on previous episodes ways to keep touchable items to a minimum table side, and then also know the hot spots in your location for cleanliness so that you can get on those and keep maybe, as Miguel said, a more rapid approach to cleanliness in that section throughout the day. The next section we want to jump to is staff and safety. Traditionally staff is reticent to stringently follow each piece of safety advice. We know that, but I feel like we as leaders have to make it clear to them that this is not an option now, and it carries consequences and discipline. As I said previously, training and habits are the two biggest things to making sure that staff and safety are followed in each location, and it really comes from leadership on those. Communication, signing, repetition, and here's one of my biggest pet peeves: explain the why behind the do. It takes an extra minute, do it. It's so important. The employee will love you for that. Explain the why behind the do. So Miguel, I want to get some of your thoughts on conditions that staff might have to meet coming in. What are your thoughts on what we're probably looking at as far as requirements?
So as an employer, we can actually do what we want. And so make sure that you feel comfortable that you can actually put in whatever standards you deem, and you're not going to be worried about maybe being sued for creating a bad work environment or whatever it may be, as long as you do it equally across everybody. So if you feel someone is sick and shouldn't come to work, don't make them come to work. They're not required to come in, nor can they make themselves want to come in. Again, make sure you're consistent across the board on how you treat all employees from their protected backgrounds. That being said, there are great companies out there, as well as organizations that for a low cost or almost even free will handle a lot of the training for you. As has been said in prior episodes, the requirements that were in place in the past in respects to how to keep a clean and safe environment are going to be just as good for moving forward. Granted, we'll add some additional items, but great hygiene that was done prior to the COVID crisis is going to be the same place now. And so having these companies come in and train your staff and have everyone either ServSafe certified or sanitation certified is really important. And having an extra company do it or an outsider, I think it's important for two reasons. As a parent, I will tell you there's times where I've had my kids' friends tell them the exact same thing I said, and they're like, oh, I'm going to do that because they were saying. I'm like, I've been telling you all along. And so here's what they know about me as if I'm an employer telling someone about sanitation. I'm not a sanitation expert. I'm not a health expert. I'm a GM, I'm an owner, or I know about food. And so I cannot speak to in a position of authority the way someone else could who has been trained on to talk about these things. They can answer all the questions about cross contamination and things like that. So it's really having these people in place is really important. But what you can do and you must do as an owner is to have a vigilant eye on what's really the most important pieces. And so it's kind of tough to train also on everything, but really look at what are the key things that are be really, really important to have to do. So one is washing hands on a consistent basis over and over and over again. Keep watching your staff. What are they doing? So if you do happen to allow smoke breaks, then make sure they're really fully washing themselves afterwards. Make sure that's happening. Watching for their behaviors in respect to touching their faces, their hair, their bodies, how clean their uniforms are, is something you need to be looking at on a regular basis. And then another piece, how clean is their workstation, especially in the kitchen? To me, it was always important just in general, because if you're a clean cook, means you're actually wasting less food. So it helps you from a food cost point of view. But the reality is keeping a clean workstation is another sign of you eliminating cross-contamination. We don't know enough yet as to how this disease can get transferred. I'm hearing reports that it can actually stay on cardboard for days. It can stay on stainless steel for hours. So it's not just keeping me away from you and sneezing on you. It's the fact that if you touch that surface and then I touch it, 2 hours later, potentially I could get it. Right. So these same habits that from before of cross-contamination need to be kept up with. And so same as you're teaching your young child how to brush their teeth and stay on top of them and reminding them, you have to be vigilant in that respect as to what you're doing, and you have the power to hold them accountable. And I will second what you said earlier.
Right.
This is a no-go zone in respects to like, oh, you'll learn eventually. People's lives are at stake, and honestly, your business is at stake. I think the federal government, local government, and health department are not going to take keenly finding out or seeing things that are not being done correctly, and they will shut you down, and you will lose everything.
Absolutely. And to Miguel's point, there may be some regulations on employees may have to have a temperature check before they come in. There may be a checklist where if they check mark any box, they can't come in. We don't know yet what is going to be enforced locally, statewide, federally for that. But be prepared. I think at a minimum, there's probably going to be temperature checks. I've been hearing that a lot. So make sure you've got a device that can do temperature checks, hands-free temperature checks for your employees. I've also come up with a concept, and I don't know, Miguel, I want you to chime in on it as well. Typically, most hospitality businesses, it's shift time. Is my employee here or not here? There's no 3 hours before. I get a call the day before, or I get a call the morning of when I've got appointments now for different things. So maybe it's a regime of 3 hours before every shift. The employee is required to call in and say, I meet all the criteria to be in today, or I don't. Yeah. So rethink how you engage with your employee. They get a bad rap. Employees get a bad rap for, I'm sick today. And in many cases that may be the case or not the case. There's no room for letting somebody come in that's even pretending to be sick during this crisis. And so I think that's important to recognize. To Miguel's point about a smoke break, I think that might be another one of those why behind the do. Hey, folks, I know you want to take a smoke break or a vape break. Here's why that may not be a good idea for you health-wise. And also, but explain the why behind it, right? Explain the why behind it. You also want.
Well, I'm going to add real quick. Is make sure that always we're talking about what are the health habits of these individuals and how it impacts our business, but it also impacts the other coworkers. And I found in the past that if you're that manager, that owner that's just going to be friendly with everybody, and you maybe avoid confrontation as most human beings do, you kind of stay back. It doesn't really help you out, and because the good people want you to hold the bad people accountable. And so if Roger's always late and our boss never says anything to Roger, I start getting frustrated after a while. And so the same thing for me is if I'm seeing that Roger's got some bad habits, I'm noticing as much as the boss is noticing it. And if he doesn't say anything, I start wondering, man, he's not doing things to keep me safe.
Right.
And if I'm not safe, odds are I'm not going to give it my all to learn new positions, to work harder, to be here, and potentially even put my family at risk. And so it is important that you're doing these things not just protect your customers from a potential someone being sick, but also, more importantly, your employees. And you want to take care of them. And worst case, you could get sued for not doing the right things. In that situation, hold people accountable.
And to Miguel's point about accountability, and also this kind of goes back, I feel like customer access to information and safety as well. I'm a big fan of having employees wear name tags and having their name on there. It's easier for the customer to remember who it is, and to keep some accountability for what that interaction is. So I'm a big fan of those. Obviously, you'll have to have some extras or some blanks if somebody forgets theirs. It's really difficult for staff to be socially distanced and do their job. We get that. So whatever needs to be done as far as protective equipment for them to do their job and do it safely, you certainly want to make sure that is available for them. So vendors are coming into our hospitality locations, and not that gossip is a bad thing. It's, to me, the vendors have such powerful information to share about the industry. I love being able to take time and talk with them when they come in, but they also talk to other places. So the better you're handling all of your safety for them and how they interact with your team is valuable. So maybe take a moment, Miguel, to talk about vendors and safety focus there.
I look at it at the end of the day with any individuals, social distancing is really important as you progress into the different phases of being ready to be fully reopened. And so I would treat them as I would treat anybody else I don't know where they've been or where they've interacted, is make sure we're staying 6 feet apart from each other and not exchanging paperwork. Listen, my general operating of a restaurant policy was I didn't like vendors dropping in on me because they usually drop in the best time. I would tell them, hey, set an appointment with me. I will give you undivided attention for that time period. And so that makes it easier to have those conversations, and you're not all of a sudden you turn around, there's someone here that you didn't expect, and you ask them to back away or to have a different conversation. Other piece of it is, although we have paper in front of us, I'm more of a digital person. And so whatever they're bringing you, hey, can you email me that pamphlet? Can you email me that price list? That way it's digital and you're not sharing paperwork.
Right.
Other vendors you're looking at, not only people who are selling things to you, but also people bringing things to you. So when your vendors come in through your back door, your delivery drivers, think about it. Majority of what you're getting comes in cardboard boxes. And we stated earlier, cardboard boxes right now, from the studies are showing, are tending to hold the buyers up to 3 days. So what are you doing? Same process you may have had for your home when you had your groceries being delivered by Shipt or by Instacart. You're doing the same thing when you have US Foods or Cisco bring your product in. So are we discarding those cardboard boxes? Are we using gloves when we're touching it and get rid of it immediately getting out of the restaurant? Are we wiping down the foods coming in? And it sounds kind of crazy, but you may need to wipe down the plastic containers or the wraps that your meat's coming in or boxes coming in. That way you don't put it into your storage.
Right.
We don't know fully what it does in cold weather. We know that the heat does help, but most of our food is not being put in heat. It's being put in refrigerators or freezers, which generally, most often not, what it does is freezes the item, but doesn't actually kill it. And so when it comes back to temperature, it could pose a threat of cross-contaminating someone else. So make sure you're wiping these things down and getting rid of it. And then making sure those drivers are staying away from you, not really interacting as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, I love that concept of getting vendors to the degree we have control over that to set appointments to come at a more regimented schedule. And perhaps it's a policy that you give to the vendor is they want your business, and especially now more than ever. So, here's our policy. Here's what I require you to wear. Here's the hours that I require you to deliver it. And these are our processes. So I love that idea, Miguel. The final group that we have facing is obviously health inspectors. I'm assuming they're going to be extra vigilant when places reopen to dine in because of whatever new regulations are put in and just the community focus to begin with. I like the philosophy of figuring my health inspector's coming in today. Today's my opening day for dine-in. They're coming in today. How do I need to have everything? And every day after that, same mentality. Now that should have been the mentality before, but I think extra emphasis. What are your thoughts on that and how to make sure that you've prepared everything as a hospitality person to meet the expectations of the health inspector?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, a health inspection is not a surprise in respects to what they're going to check. They may be surprised when they come, and sometimes they come middle of lunch and you're busy, so it's not great from a time point of view, from your attention. But you should never be surprised as to what is it exactly they check. And so if you're not intimately aware of what the actual report looks like, get a copy. The health department will be happy to hand you a copy of what it looks like. And so why do you want it? Because you want to do it on a regular basis. You can be your own self-inspector, walk through and with your chef or some of your staff members say, let's do a walkthrough and see what we're seeing. That way you can make sure we're doing proper habits. You can also hire external companies that do the exact same thing for you. In some situations, even sterner. When I was back in the corporate world, I didn't really care about my health inspector coming in because his standards were below our standards. And so a lot of it comes down to what your brand wants to stand for. And if your standards are higher than the health inspectors, then you're probably going to be okay with he or she walks in.
Right.
Yes, the results of them having a bad score with them has a bigger impact because that's an external reporting versus internal. But I think you need to look at what your standards are. I personally believe that the health inspector standards, I'm not saying they're low, but they're not necessarily the highest hurdle they should be. You should have a much higher hurdle for yourself and your team. If you train for that hurdle, you can do much better in the competition when they show up and interact with you.
And what's your thoughts on having a team template for who handles the health inspector, what documents are needed, what guidelines are followed, so that there's an actual process when they come in?
So most often not when the health inspector shows up is what I've seen the most is someone distracts the health inspector for a few minutes while someone else runs back and then tries to do things correctly that probably should have been done. And so that is probably the worst thing you should ever do.
Right.
Point being is that The health inspector wants to talk to the manager on duty, plain and simple. And so that's what needs to be done. Now, should you tell everyone that the health inspector is here? Yeah, out of courtesy. And do I expect that you're probably going to tidy up something that you probably should have done before? That's going to happen. We're not perfect, and nor are they looking for perfection. But definitely the attitude of all your managers need to be ServSafe certified, actually by law, and need to actually be ready to interact with the health inspector, and you should not be surprised what the process looks like. So if you have a new manager or someone in a managerial position that's never done a health inspection, do right by them, but actually walking through with them what the actual process is. Obviously if you're in a room, then you want to be there with them. And maybe if they're new, have them come along with you so they learn what that process feels like and looks like. For most people, it's very nerve-wracking. It's almost like getting a root canal. You don't know what to do, and you don't know what to say. They're human beings, much like you and I are. And my experience over the years, a lot of my health inspectors dine in my restaurant. They loved coming to my restaurants because it was clean, and we had a great reputation, interaction. That being said, there were times where they found things that we had wrong, and we learned from each other. And so don't take it adversarial. Make sure your staff knows what to do. And if you have a brand new manager who's never done it before, teach them what that process looks like, that we're not afraid. And then all your documents need to be easily available.
Right.
Most of them are usually hung up on the wall anyways.
Right.
And you should have had that ready for you.
Yeah, and I think the health inspectors, they're not in a vacuum. They know what's going on. They know what the hospitality world is facing. And so hopefully they come in humbly and aware of that. And as hospitality owners, we need to thank them for their service, because at the end of the day, they're keeping places that are not running their shops well on the hook to either clean up or get out, and that keeps the overall image of the industry higher. So it's the classic thank them, and as you said, be prepared, have your team prepared to know what comes next. So we want to thank everybody for being with us for episode 4, safety. This is really our guidelines for reopening, and we'd love any comments on the Facebook group on things that you would like to see in regards to that. But for now, Miguel and I are going to say goodbye and see you on episode 5.